talk to you just a little bit tonight about some things out of that chapter 23. Now, we had a good day today, and I appreciate, things go well. It's amazing that the harder you work and try to do good and to do right, how God blesses it. Someone said the more I work, the luckier I get. And you have to work at trying to get a good job done, and I appreciate Ryan Stanley and working with Joel Hudson and I believe also Mary Murphy. They all put together the video presentation that you saw this morning, and appreciate that. I thought it was excellent, and just thank you for the good job that you did on that. All right, here in chapter 23, and down about verse 24, and by the way, this is a pretty rough chapter. Chapter 23, verse 24, Jesus said to the religious leaders of his day, "You blind guides." I took a trip several times when I've been to Israel and that part of the world, and we always had a guide. We had a guide in Israel, we had a guide in Egypt, we had a guide in Jordan, we had a guide when we were in, I don't know where we were, but Germany or somewhere. But we always had guides because we didn't know where we were going. And but could you imagine if all the guides were blind? Over here somewhere, there's a monument, I don't know where we're at, The Lord, that's interesting. He said, "You blind guides." And he said, if the blind lead the blind, they both fall in a ditch. So if we are going to be leaders and guides for people, we certainly want to make sure we're not blind. We need to know where we're going, and we need to know why we're going there, and we certainly need to know how to get there. But he says, "You blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." Isn't that amazing? That's not a cigarette, that camel. That's a real live horse put together by a Baptist committee, and they call it a camel. And he said, "You strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." President Truman said that the urgent is seldom important, and the important is seldom urgent. Usually the thing that we are most urgent about is probably not important anyway. And the things that are important, we just never seem to get around to, and that's certainly true in a church. Someone has said that 80% of the things we focus on within the church only produce 20% of the results. 80% of the things we focus on only produce 20% of the results. And therefore, that means that we're only spending 20% of the money and time on the things that really matter. We need to find out what matters, and that's where we need to put our energy, and that's where we need to put our finances, I think. But it's easy to get sidetracked. The most difficult thing in the world is to stay focused. That's true with all of us. A ship will drift, an airplane will drift, and you and I will drift. A church will drift. There has to be something built in that keeps bringing it and getting it back on course. That's just the way life is. And an airplane will drift unless it has built-in controls to keep it on focus. When we were on target, when we were flying to India recently, we flew Singapore Airline out of San Francisco. And when the plane took off, it headed north, and believe it or not, it came right back up past Seattle Airport. I thought, well, that's kind of dumb. They could have landed and picked us up. But we had to go to San Francisco and board the airplane, and it flew right back up here and went up all the way up to British Columbia, and then made a left and went out this side of the Aleutian chain and flew right on over to Japan and over Japan and over that way, and finally landed in Hong Kong, and then took off from there and went to Madras. But it took that route. And as we got up around British Columbia, we got a little breeze. And I would guess it was about a 300 or 400 mile an hour breeze, the way that 747 was bouncing around in the air. Some of you fellows remember that, don't you? Were you sleeping, Ron, when that happened? Well, you weren't on that flight. You were smart. That's right. You went the other way. Well, Habman was there. Where were you hiding, Dave? Right next to me. Well, that was you. Okay. But the thing I remember is the wind evidently was blowing against the side of the plane. And boy, you would get a breeze. You could hear that like it's blowing against the side of your house. And then those engines, they just throttled down. I mean, just like they were starving for air. And what was going is those engines were laboring to keep that plane on target. You understand what when the wind began to blow against it, the engines had to rev up to keep that plane on target because they had everything programmed in. And so the computers were working overtime to keep that plane right on the course. A ship is the same way. If you don't have it programmed in to keep it on target, it's going to drift off course. Now, many of us do not have anything built into our lives to keep us on target. And that is why it's so important to have a purpose and to have a goal and to have a purpose for your life and to have a goal for your life and get those things set and make up your mind and determine. And then when the storm comes, you don't have to decide which way should I go. You just rev up the engines and just stay on target. Because you can't stop the storms. You can't stop the tide. You can't stop the conditions of life. They're going to come. No matter how, if you drift, they're going to come anyway. You're not going to stop the storms. You're not going to stop the winds. You're not going to stop the rain. So all you can do is build in some kind of system from the Word of God that keeps you on target. And if you and I are straining at gnats, we're never going to be on target. You see? And we just get off. So religion and tradition have a way of distorting truth and blinding us to which is really important. And what is important? Well, the nation of Israel certainly had this problem. They had it big time because they didn't know what was important. The very Son of God was in their presence and they didn't know it. The kingdom was there offered to them. They didn't see it. And God sent righteous men and prophets to them and they killed them. And that's what Stephen said when he was preaching his sermon in the book of Acts. Which of the prophets, how you doing, brother? Good to have you here. All the way from where? Where? London. Okay. Obviously you didn't get bombed. It's good to have you here. I'm glad you're here. Good to see you tonight. All right. And so the nation had this problem. Now, you'll notice the Lord's rebuke of their attention to that which is insignificant. That which was unimportant. Believe me, they paid a lot of attention to something. But the Lord rebuked them and said what they were paying attention to was insignificant as far as the kingdom of God was concerned. And they were majoring on minors and minoring on the majors. And they were ignorant of what really mattered. Now, one of the things you see in the chapter is that they thought titles and positions were more important than service. It's right in the context. If you look at verse 5, in fact, it's through the whole thing. But if you go back to verse 5, you'll notice it says, but all of their works they do to be seen of men. Now this, you can see what motivated this crowd. It was the attention of men. Now we all like attention. Sometimes we need some attention. But if you crave attention, you got a problem. And if you crave attention, you are seriously going to be disappointed in your life because nobody can give you all the attention you want if that's what you're after. And you got to get over that. You know, the person whose attention you ought to get would be God's attention. You see? And, you ought not to be seeking attention. That's worldly. That's fleshly. Now, if you are worthy and you're doing a good job for Jesus Christ, somebody's going to notice it. But if you're just trying to get noticed, you're carnal and you're straining at the wrong thing. You're not important because you get attention. A fellow could walk out here with no clothes on. He'd get a lot of attention. You see? But he'd be kind of stupid. And so, and some people, they do everything for attention. And you need to get beyond that. You need to grow up because it says all their works they do to be seen of men. And if you don't give them attention, they don't do it anymore. Nobody appreciates me. Nobody complimented me. I got up and sang. Nobody applauded. Nobody complimented me. Nobody told me what a great job I did. Maybe you didn't do a good job. Did you ever stop and think about that? I mean, it really doesn't matter. Just do the best you can. But if you're doing it for the glory of God, you won't be thinking about whether you did a good job or whether people appreciate it or not. And so the whole idea here is that you should not be seeking attention, and people who are infatuated with titles and positions are straining at gnats because they're not that important. Nobody's remembered because of their titles. People are remembered because of their accomplishments. Nobody cares about your title. Nobody cares about mine. I don't care if a man's got a doctor's degree, if he's a butcher. Do you? The title's not that important. And so you're straining at gnats and swallowing camels if you think that's what's important. You know, verse 6, they love the uppermost part of the feast, the rooms of the feast, and they love the chief seats in the synagogue. They're always looking for the seat to where they can get the most attention. Say, best thing to do is go to the lowest seat, and then the only way you can go is up. And that's what the Lord said. He said, take the lower position. So men can, if you move, the only way you can go is up. And if you're always trying to get the best seat and get to the front of the line and all of that, then you're thinking about yourself. Verse 7, they love the greetings in the marketplace to be called rabbi, rabbi. They love that. To be called teacher, teacher. And they love it. Nothing wrong, I guess, to be calling rabbi, but there's something wrong if you love it. See? Jesus said to his disciples, you're not to be called rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ. And you are brethren. And so as you think about each other as being your brother in Christ, no one really is more important than you are, and you're not any more important than anybody else. And but verse 11, it says, he that would be the greatest among you, let him be the servant. Let him be your servant. So if you really want to be used of God, become a servant and serve God's people. You know, the outstanding thing we remember about Jesus Christ is when he girded himself with a towel and began to wash his disciples' feet. That probably is one of the greatest acts while he was on earth, other than when he died on the cross. Then he said to his disciples, do you know what I've done? And he said, well, what I've done here, you should do for one another. And so titles and positions, when people think that titles and positions are more important than service, they are straining at gnats. Now what does that mean, straining at a gnat? Well, when I was a boy, and I can only illustrate it from my own background, but when I was a boy, my mother and so on, they used to milk cows, dairy cows. They milked them by hand. And they had a little three-legged stool, and they would go out and they would sit down beside old Bossy and put the bucket underneath her, and they would start milking, and they would milk the milk into a big bucket. And then you would go back to the house, and you would take a piece of cheesecloth, and you would spread it over another bucket, an empty bucket. And you would take that milk, and you would pour it through the cheesecloth, and you are straining it. Because when you're out in the barn, there's debris flying around. In fact, old Bossy may just put her foot in the bucket. You hope she doesn't, because that really messes up the milk, but I've seen cows do that. I've seen them kick the bucket clean across the barn. But there are just things, the little bugs flying around, and they land in the milk. Of course, that gives it protein if you don't strain it out. But you go back and you strain out those little bugs. Another thing that's used is called a sieve. It has the same effect. And when I was a boy, you would go to the store, you bought flour, and you bought it in 25 and 50 pound bags. And the bags were made of printed material. And so you would get the 25 or 50 pounds of flour, but you also got some material to have a shirt made out of it, or a blouse or something of that nature, and it was printed material. And but you didn't use up, you didn't run to the store all the time like you do here. You maybe went once a month. And so you would have that bag of, that sack of flour sitting underneath the cupboard. And little creatures would come in and visit it. And you would have cockroaches, and you'd have other things that might get in and work on the flour in those 30 days. So every time, or sometimes, the humidity would cause it to lump up. And so you would put some flour in the sieve, a metal thing, with a screen in the bottom of it, and a handle that turned, and a rotor that went around, and it would sieve it out. And then you would throw out all the bugs and the chunks and give it to the chickens. Oh yeah, you throw it out in the front yard, the chickens would eat it. Now you see, this is a history class that some of you kids are getting, and this is invaluable. I mean, this will help you in your life. I don't know how, but my point is that that's, and so they were straining out and sieving out these undesirables. And so Jesus said to these Pharisees, you spend your time looking for gnats and cockroaches, and you, while you're doing it, you're swallowing an entire camel. And I think you get the picture. The idea here is that you can focus on things and actually be obsessed with them, and they're not important at all. And the very important thing is walking right under your nose, or you know, you're just, you know, it's like a fellow finding fault in the Bible with the these and the thous. And he spends all of his time trying to correct the these and the thous. And what he does ultimately is he takes it a step further, and the next thing you know, he's taken out the blood of Christ and the deity of Christ. So he's straining at gnats here, the these and the thous, and when it's over with, he's got the blood of Christ and the deity of Christ out of his Bible. And that kind of stuff goes on. And so these men, they were interested in titles and positions. I bet I've had, over the years, I've had 3 or 4 laymen to come in my office upset with me because I didn't hire them on staff. I had more than one. And I passed over them. And I hired Brother Murphy. And I passed over them and hired, who was the other guy? Who? Not Habman. Yeah, Habman, but there was a guy before. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Kurt Kennedy. Kurt had never been to Bible college and all of that. But I hired him to work here. He's a good man. But one of the guys got mad because I didn't hire him and quit the church. See? Well, now he would have really been a good employee, because with my temperament and my behavior, I would have never made him mad after he went to work for me, you know. You get the picture? Not only that, but now listen. Here's a guy that doesn't get hired. Nobody promised him anything. He just felt that he deserved it. He got upset because he didn't get it, and he gets mad at me. The word gets around, and he quits the church. Now, can you imagine that a year later he applies for a position somewhere, and that pastor calls me up and said, you know, Brother Blue, so-and-so here's applied for an assistant pastor job, and I know he was in your church. Can you recommend him? See, he just swallowed a camel, and it's going to choke him. Doesn't get it. See, the best thing you can do when you get upset and you leave a place, you know, you should shine your heels as well as the toes on your shoe. If you leave in good graces and do it, you may be upset. Don't let anybody know. Especially don't let the pastor know. But we do that kind of thing. You see, we're busy focusing on things that we fail to realize that are going to cause us some serious problem, you know. But nothing makes a man feel religious like putting on a religious garment. Folks say, what's your religious attire? You know what it is? It's your face as a Christian. There's no religious garb that we wear, you know. And they love their long robes. Did you notice that? They love their long robes, and they love to have the religious trappings, you know, and all that kind of nonsense. Here in chapter 23. They love to wear their long robes. And look at verse 5 of Matthew chapter 23. They love to be seen of men, and they enlarge the borders of their garments, and so on. So when you think, or when anyone thinks that a title or a position is more important than service, you are straining at a gnat and swallowing camels according to the Bible. Does that make sense to you? If you'll give good service, you'll be recognized. If you are recognized and gives good service, you'll get the title if you deserve it. But a title never makes the man. It won't make you successful no matter what you're called. Doesn't mean a thing. Do you know what? In 35 years, no one cares where I went to Bible college. Nobody cares. Folks don't walk up and say, oh, let's see, how long did you go to Bible college? Where'd you go? They don't care. Folks don't care about those things. They care about if you are, if you are delivering the mail. They care if you are meeting the need in their life. They care if you are helping them and their family. That's what people care about. That's what you care about, isn't it? See? And so titles and positions, when you think they're more important than service. Another thing is that, it's an interesting thing in verse 13. It says, but woe unto you, I'm in Matthew 23:13, but woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourself, neither suffer ye them that are to enter in. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourself. Isn't that interesting? They didn't care about this man's soul. They cared about having a convert to their cause. And there is a world of difference. My secondary goal is to make people converts to Open Door Baptist Church. That's not my primary objective. If people don't come to Jesus Christ, then we have failed in what we're trying to do. And so you swallow a camel, you strain at gnats and swallow camels, and that's what they were doing, and that's in the context. When winning men to a cause is more important than winning them to a person. And we do that if we're not careful in church. We've got some little pet doctrine, some little pet idea, some little pet peeve, and we run around trying to convert people to our idea. You see, we want converts to it. And you and I should never try to seek converts to us. We should try to get converts to Jesus Christ. John the Baptist said, behold the Lamb of God. He tried to point people to Jesus Christ. Listen, I don't care whether I have a following or not. If I can get you to follow Jesus Christ, everything will be okay. You understand? Doesn't make any difference. I want you to pay attention to me. I want you to love me more than you do Jason. I was in his office a while ago, and I looked over, a green-eyed monster I am. I looked over and I saw he had about 4 sacks of Starbucks coffee. And I thought, where's Celeste Wallace? Why is Jason getting all that coffee? I only got about 1 bag, and he's got 4. And he's the assistant pastor here. I'm the pastor. Nah, I really don't care. I don't care how much he... Oh, there she is. Now, I'll have a truckload of coffee, I guess, coming in. Or something. Be burning crosses in my yard. Hey, I don't care. You're not going to love that guy too much as far as I'm concerned. I don't care how much you love him. I want you to love him and love him and love him. I don't care. I want you to love Dave Hatman. See, I'm not jealous a bit. I want you to love him. Give me some coffee every once in a while, but love him. Don't go to seed on it. But look, if he can get his teenagers to follow Jesus Christ, he's a success. If all he can do is get them to follow him, he's a failure, because when he leaves, they quit. He wants them to follow Jesus Christ when he's out of the picture. When they go home, when they go off to Bible college, when they go somewhere else to work. He wants them to live for Christ. But this crowd, if you notice in verse 13 down through the verses there, they compassed land and sea. That was their missionary program. They went everywhere they could to get one convert to themselves. And when they did, they were more a child of hell than themselves. You know why? Because they missed the whole point. The goal would be to get people to God, not to themselves or to a cause. And that is so important, because you will see when you're in a church for any period of time, there will always be some people who will come in who will befriend you to try to win you to a cause that they are sold on. I'll just tell you a story. Brother Murphy was telling me today about a fellow that was looking for a church. And I don't know the whole story, obviously. But I guess it turned into a little debate over the so-called gap theory between Genesis 1 and 2. And the guy looking for the church didn't believe in that, and so he left. He didn't join. Now, I don't know the whole story, but that's all the story I know, okay? But let me tell you something. You should never divide anybody from your church or from following Jesus Christ over the gap theory or any theory. It's not that important. Who cares? I sure don't care. Why would I care? When did the church start? Who cares? It's here, isn't it? What day was the world created? Was it Wednesday or Thursday? Was it 8 a.m. or 9 a.m.? Who cares? We know it's here. Right? Who cares? I mean, I know what I believe, but I'm sure not going to run you off if you don't agree with what I believe on those things. Why should I? And that's called straining at gnats. And there's guys that do that all the time. You know. Do you have Ruckman's books in the bookstore? Well, if you do, we're not going to stay. Bye. I mean, you know what? If I go down and pull Ruckman's books out, the next thing you're going to come back and you're going to go down and see what else is down there you don't like. And you're not going to hold me hostage. You understand how that works? Pretty soon I can never accommodate you until I have your books down there, because I have to pull my own out. You can't go down that road. It's not important. If you don't like them, don't buy them. It's not important. I don't agree with everything down there. I don't even agree with everything I wrote. Doesn't matter. That's childish. It's just childish. It's not important. You know what's important? The deity of Jesus Christ and the blood atonement and the virgin birth, and people are dying and going to hell. You see? Now these are vitals. And the preservation and the infallibility of the Word of God. I mean, those things are not debatable. But some of this other stuff, you know, it just goes on. Like, you know, did angels come down and cohabitate with women? I don't know. Who cares? Do angels have wings or not? I don't think they do, but who cares? If you think they do, go ahead and think that. You'll see I'm right when we get to heaven. Well, I don't care. I mean, I have an opinion about it, but I'm not going to run you off because of that and say, well, you're just stupid. You don't see it the way I see it. You know, you see. That's called straining at gnats and swallowing camels. And people do it all the time. They're just looking for some issue. I mean, I've seen folks just waiting for you to offend them so they can leave. You know? That way I can leave and say, you know, you stepped on my toes, or you didn't shake hands with me, or you offended me, or something. You know, I don't know what to tell you. Get over it. Just get over it. Why? Man, you think I haven't been offended by church members in 35 years? I get offended every Sunday. You don't put enough in the offering. No. I don't pay any attention to it. I don't pay any attention to it. Spurgeon said you got to have two listen, church members. He said it to pastors, but some of you would do well to take heed to it. You need to have 2 deaf ears and 1 blind eye. You need to hear nothing that you're hearing except my preaching, and you need to see half of what you're seeing. Some of you see too much and hear too much. You're too much in attune to everything that's going on. You know, Mike McBride was a detective for 20-something years. I understand that him, you know, that he watches things. I understand that. But that's not your job. Let him do that. See? Learn what's important. And forget about the other thing. You know, you go down and eat. Some of you went out to eat today, you know, and you get a steak, a big juicy steak at the Red Lobster. You got a big old juicy steak about 18 inches, you know, with mushrooms on the top of it, and onions and all that kind of stuff, and you got all that on there, and you run into a little bitty gristle, and you spend the rest of the afternoon chewing on that gristle. That's not too smart. You spit it out, and you go on and enjoy the steak and go on with your life. All life has gristles in it. All life has problems in it. You can't focus on those. You fix them if you can, but you go on. You go on. When you think that winning men to your particular cause is more important than winning them to a person like Jesus Christ, then you've missed the point. They did not want people to come to Christ, and they attempted to convert them to their own personal causes. I see pastors, they get in trouble. They get caught up in politics. I think people ought to vote. You've got freedom in this country. You ought to vote on issues that are important to you. But you can get so sidetracked on political issues that you miss the big picture. The big picture is people are dying and going to hell. And if you got as concerned about missions and people dying and going to hell as some people are about politics, why, you'd be a dynamo for God. See? I'm not against, you need to do those things, but don't leave the other undone. But I see people, I've seen them over the years. I know a preacher down in Oregon a few years ago. This has been probably 15, 20 years ago. This guy had as much potential as anybody I know. I could tell you his name, but it wouldn't do any good. Now I'm not going to do it. But it's a good preacher building a good church. He got caught up in politics. And the next thing you know, he saw the government as the adversary. And he was preaching that people in the church should no longer, that churches should not be incorporated, and that people should not have marriage license because marriage is not part of the state. You don't need permission of the state to get married. And the next thing you know, you should have complete separation of church and state, which means you can't have money because it is government money. And then you go on the gold standard, and you get rid of your driver's license, and you get rid of, yeah, that's anarchy. That's stupid. That's insane. You say, what happened to him? Well, the last I heard, he got divorced and ruined his church and ruined his marriage and ruined his life. The devil wants to get you out chasing fleas. He wants to get you straining at gnats, and all they do is take up your time. Don't waste your time on them. Just see what the big picture is, and then start working toward it one step at a time. Not only that, you know that they thought the sound and the length of their prayer was more important than the prayer itself. Why, these folks right here have one of the prettiest babies I've ever seen since our babies. No, I don't know if it's the prettiest baby, but that is a beautiful baby. And I saw the picture of Mark up here, and it's amazing how beautiful that baby is after seeing Mark's picture up here. Or Tom. But, yeah, okay, yeah. But anyway, it's a beautiful baby. And my point is that has he started talking yet or saying anything? Not even one word, not even Daddy? You need to work on him. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, when he even makes a sound that sounds like Dada, he's going to, you're going to pick up on it. Say. And, it's really not too important how accurate our little children sound when they talk. The beautiful thing is they just are learning to talk. Of course, later on, you kind of, when they get to be about 2, you kind of wish they would slow down. Who wound them up? But my point is this. If you look at verse 14, he say, "Woe unto you, you scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses," watch it, "and for a pretense." These guys were pretenders. They were pretenders in every way. They weren't sincere about serving God. Their heart was far from God. They were pretending. Notice he says, "You make long prayers, therefore you shall receive the greater damnation." I think your prayers ought to be proper. People ought to be able to hear them if it's public prayer. It ought to be appropriate for the occasion. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think that God is hearing you because of how long you pray, you are sadly mistaken. John R. Rice said, it doesn't take a long prayer to reach God if you don't live too far away. And I think that's good advice. It's not how lengthy the prayer is, not how eloquent the prayer is. It's how sincere the prayer is. And that's what's important. And if people think that the sound and the length of the prayer is more important than the prayer itself, that's called straining at gnats and swallowing a camel. Number 4, if you notice in verse 16, they thought that the material was more important than the spiritual. You blind guides which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he's a debtor. You see where their values were? It was on the money, the gold that was in the offering, that was in the treasury. And so you could swear by the temple, I swear by Jerusalem, or I swear by the temple that I am telling the truth. And they could swear by that, and or swear by God, which they were forbidden to do, and they could be fined. You see, or they could be absolved. But if they swore by the gold in the temple, then they had to pay a debt. They were fined. They could swear they could swear by the altar, but they couldn't swear by the sacrifice on the altar. If they did, they would be fined. And Jesus said, you blind hypocrites. If you notice what it says in let's look at verse 16. Woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it's nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he's a debtor. He's going to be fined. Verse 17, you fools and blind, for whether is greater the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? Verse 18, and you say, whosoever shall swear by the altar, it's nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gift upon it, he's guilty. And so they would fine him. Verse 19, you fools and blind, for whether is greater the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? It was the altar that made the gift an offering. It was the temple that made the gold a gift to God, a dedication to God. So they were blind as to the value of the temple and the altar, what they signified. Does that make sense to you? I hope so. All right. And so he says down in verse 20, whosoever therefore shall swear by the altar, sweareth by it and all things thereon. And whosoever shall swear by the temple, sweareth by it and by him that dwelleth therein. That's God. And he that sweareth by the heavens, sweareth by the throne of God, and he that sits on the throne. And so the obvious thing is that they had no concept of what was valuable and what was important. They were straining at gnats and swallowing camels, and they thought the gold was more important than the temple, and they swore by the gold and was held accountable. They thought that the gift was more important than the altar, and therefore they could swear by the altar and be free. But if they swore by the gift, they required to pay a fine. And thus they saw no spiritual value in the temple or in the altar. And their focus was on the material, it was on the gift, and not on the item that sanctified it. See? You see, as far as God is concerned, if you put money in the offering and give it for missions or give it for your church, it has totally a different meaning than if you take it down and give it to the gas attendant for gasoline. It has a different purpose and it has a different meaning. And so the money is the same. It has the same denominational value. It has all of that. But the fact that you bring it in and you give it for the cause of Christ, you put it in the offering plate, or something of that nature, then that money then becomes sanctified or dedicated, just a big word for sanctification, is dedicated. It becomes dedicated to God. And so the same thing was true. The gold was simply gold, but when it was given in the temple, it became dedicated or sanctified, set apart for God. The gift on the altar had no value, no spiritual value, until it was put on the altar. It was the altar that made it valuable to God. But they were blind to that because they were looking at the monetary reward they could get for fining people who swore by the sacrifice or who swore by the gold. But they would they absolved them as far as the altar and as far as the temple was concerned. I hope that makes sense to you. It does to me. All right. Buy my tape. Notice in verse 23, they thought tithing was more important than the balanced life. Woe to you, you scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law. Judgment, mercy, and faith, these ought you to have done, and not to have left the other undone. These fellows were so meticulous that they would sit down before the Sabbath, and they would get all the seeds from their garden, and they would get a magnifying glass and some tweezers, and they would count out, here's 10 for God and 90 for me, and here's 10 for God and here's 90 for me. And they would get to the smallest item, the smallest detail, you see. And they made a big thing out of it. However, they had no mercy for the woman taken in adultery. They had no judgment when it came to spiritual things. And yet, boy, when it came to, to narrowing it right down to the 10% every time, they never missed a lick. See? Now, your tithe is important to the work of God. Your giving to missions is important to the work of God. But let me tell you something that's more important to God than your tithe. And that is spiritual judgment and mercy for lost people and for God's people, and faith. These things are more important. He said, you ought not to leave the other undone, but you certainly should have these three qualities in your life. If those things are missing, you're missing the whole point in your giving. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that they were straining at gnats and swallowing camels.